as far as I was concerned, we were just an accident of biology, and science could explain everything. I knew nothing about the church. I didn't even know the proper name. I just thought Mormons. All I knew was what I saw in South Park. So I went to the church's website. Something about it just made me have, an emotional response, and I started to cry.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Latter-day Believers. I'm Wilson, I'm your host again, and today I am here with an intriguing guest. We have Drake, who's going to be on the show today. How are you doing?
Wonderful, how are you?
I'm doing good. So Drake, if it's okay if we just jump into it, could you kind of tell me, where does your journey to Christ start?
So I grew up in Florida, the Tampa Bay area, and in my family, religion was never really something we talked about much. If I was to define it, I would say I was an atheist or an agnostic, but it was just something that never really came up at all in my life. I was a Boy Scout, so I went to church and I went to the physical church building, and I even did some of the youth group programs and some of the volunteer stuff. And my dad and I volunteered at the food bank. So we did activities at the church. We just never went to service, and it just never really came up. So I would define it as being an atheist or agnostic. Then as I grew up, I learned science. I was far too smart for that silly religious thing. At least that's how I looked at it.
Yeah.
That, once you know science, you can't possibly believe in these little fairy tales. And that's how I looked at it. And it was a very, let's say, educated but simplistic view of the world. And it worked for me. It was fine. In hindsight, there were many times that the Lord was reaching out to me. I completely ignored it because I didn't see the signs. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't realize that he was there reaching out to me because I just didn't even believe he existed.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough if you don't have that foundation of faith to recognize whenever you're having these acts of God, or like God's kind of reaching out to you, right?
Exactly.
So when did you feel that kind of start to shift for you, where you're maybe like, I don't know, like your faith is kind of starting to grow?
So one thing is, I'm a paramedic. You may not have known that. I'm a certified paramedic. And in Virginia, I lived there for a while as an adult, and it was a very small rural area. As a career, I worked in computers. So I made really good money what I was doing. But I loved giving back. I loved the community service side of things. It had nothing to do with religion. I just liked giving back. So I volunteered as a paramedic for my local rescue squad. For quite a bit of that time, I was the only volunteer paramedic for the entire north end of the county.
Oh my.
There were a lot of EMTs, but very few paramedics. Most, once they got their paramedic, went career and started it as a job, so very few could volunteer back again.
That's fair.
So that kind of makes sense. But my county was very poor. They did not have the money to hire people. So everyone that lived there that was a medic worked the next county over, but nobody provided services in my county. And I remember one night, and it was like, oh goodness, say 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the pager goes off, and I'm off duty. I'm at home. I'm sound asleep in my bed. Pager goes off, and I turn on the radio, and I'm listening to it. And the radio is for an unresponsive man on the side of the road. And honestly, I'm thinking it's a drunk. Some dude passed out on the side of the street. I had been there. I had done that 1,000 times. And honestly, I didn't want to get out of bed and go deal with some drunk guy on the side of the road. It wasn't my responsibility. I wasn't on duty. Somebody else was. But the problem was the crew that was on duty, they were on another call. So there was nobody available to answer the call. And something just told me, and it wasn't a voice that I heard. It was a feeling that just basically said, get your lazy butt up and go out there. So I got my lazy butt up and I went out there. And when I got there, I found a gentleman on the side of the road that wasn't drunk. He was, and I won't get all the medical geeky terms, but he was having a medical emergency where his heart was racing so incredibly fast that he had 2 options: magically fix himself, sometimes happens, or I fix him, or he dies. Those are the options. If he doesn't automatically fix it or I fix it, he is going to die. Very simple. So luckily, it was something that is incredibly simple for a paramedic to do. I'm not anybody special. Every paramedic does this exact same thing every single day. But I was able to remedy his problem, and then a crew was able to come and take him to the hospital. Normally, that's the end of the story. You fix the person, you drop them off the hospital, you never hear from them again. Then a couple years later, I'm having some construction done at my house, getting a new basement poured. And a guy walks up to me and he's like, "You don't remember me, but you saved my life." And I was like, "No, I didn't remember." And this was a big, strong, burly redneck dude. He is bawling his eyes out in tears, saying the only thing he could think about that night was his baby girl was going to lose her daddy. And I was like, thanks. I didn't need to hear that, but thanks. So I took that as a lesson, and it wasn't even at the moment a religious lesson. It was just a humanity lesson. I had judged that man even before I knew who he was. I judged the situation. I was willing to just write him off. Just like, oh, it's just some drunk. Let the law enforcement deal with it. But it was a small lesson that told me, don't judge people or the situations until you know what's going on. And that's something that kind of stuck with me.
That's a really interesting experience. And I love that you're kind of able to start recognizing that and almost kind of like starting to pick up on how God was starting to work through you, even without you really knowing it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and that was the thing is I didn't realize that was a message or him reaching out to me. It was only in hindsight now that when I look back upon it, I'm like, oh, obvious. Come on now. How did I not see it?
That happens a lot more than I think we realize. Like the more that we reflect, the more that seems to happen.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
So now you're probably wondering, like, okay, that's a cute story. Yeah. But how does that get me to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? I'm sure that's what you're wondering.
Yeah,
so,
you're right where I was going.
Okay,
Took
perfect.
the words out of my mouth.
I saved you the energy asking the question. So there actually is a valid reason why I brought that story up. So multiple years later, I'm now living in Florida. I'd left Virginia. And I'm watching some YouTubers. Sorry, not you. I didn't really know about your channels.
It's okay.
Sorry.
We'll try not to take offense. It's all good.
You're just going to end the interview right now, probably.
Yeah, it's like, all right, that's it. We're done.
Okay, good. So, like I said, it was some YouTubers that I really liked. And they are members of the church, but they don't do religious content. They just are YouTubers that happen to be members. And I was watching an interview of them. And they were talking about their beliefs, and they both are returned missionaries. And you could see the passion in what they were talking about and that they truly believed it. And mind you, I was an atheist and I knew nothing about the church. But something about it, I was like, this is like that cult out in Utah that has the silly underwear. Like that is all I knew. Yeah, those guys. I'm like, how could these guys that are like they're that? And I knew nothing about the church. I didn't even know the proper name. I just thought Mormons. And all I knew was what I saw in South Park. So if you can picture the South Park episode, that is what I knew about the religion.
Oh, man.
Yeah,
well, that's everything you need to know, right?
It was very little. Yeah, exactly. So obviously, my view was very simplistic of the church at the time. But there was something at that moment. I remembered that EMS, that 911 call that I took. And I was like, what? I first was trying to figure out why is that vision just popping in my head? I hadn't thought about that call in years. And I was like, am I judging these guys now? I don't know any of the context. So am I just judging them now? So I was like, well, I know that I'm right because obviously I have to be. I'm smarter than this. I have to be right. So let me go to my computer and I'll honestly, I figured 5 minutes of research and I'll prove myself right and I'll feel better about it. So I go online, I go anti-Mormon and search all the bad, horrible things that Google can show. And the first things I'm seeing is like this person complaining about this bishop or about this person or about this person or about this prophet. And it's all complaints about individual people. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me about the religion. Like, I'm even coming at this from an atheist perspective. I'm like, I want to know the religion, not just what some random person did or some random person said this. That doesn't tell me anything. So I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll go off the anti-Mormon and let me just do a little bit more broader search. So I started just looking at general websites about the church. Looking at it, everything that I saw made sense, even in my atheist mind. It's just basic things, like a boy's a boy, a girl's a girl, this. I'm like, okay, it made logical sense. Don't have children out of wedlock. Okay, this all made sense to me. And then I was like, well, I still don't know what the church truly believes in. So I went to the church's website. I think it's, what is it, like comefollowme.org or something like that.
Or yeah, I think now it's Church of Jesus Christ, but they had a bunch of different domains at the time. Yeah.
Okay. So whatever the website was, I stumbled across it on a Google link. And when it loaded up, it was a big picture of Jesus and then like some bullet points below it. And I remember it said something like, Jesus loves you and there's a plan and there's a reason. And I'm reading through this and something about it, I'm still an atheist at the moment, but something about it just made me have, an emotional response. And I started to cry. And I am a person that controls my emotions. I might have a temper at times, but I don't. If you see me crying, it's because of my allergies. My eyes constantly water from my allergies. But this was me crying. I was like, this is not normal. So I left the tab open for a couple weeks. And every day or so, I'd come back to it and kind of poke around the website a little bit. And I kind of read a little bit through some of the library and just kind of hit random little things. And I came across one of the forms that you could fill out. You could have the missionaries, come and visit you. Let me fill that out. And now, were you a missionary or?
I was a missionary. Yeah.
Okay. So then this next story, you will resonate perfect with you. So I filled out the form and I love these guys. And I've said this to their face, so I'm not saying anything behind their back. I filled out the form and they called me like an hour or two later. And they were so funny. They were, hello? I was like, yeah. They're like, you like filled out this request. I was like, yeah. They're like, do you want to meet with us? And I'm like, yeah. Why else would I fill out the form? And they explained later that people are constantly filling out the form that have zero interest in actually meeting with them. So they had hit a bunch of those back to back. And I was the first one in a couple days or weeks or whatever that actually wanted to meet with them.
Oh, yeah. A breath of fresh air is what it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. So they're like, okay, we can meet. When are you available? I said, well, I'm off work today. They're like, okay. And they came over and at that time, I had already read through First Nephi and Second Nephi. And on my iPad, I had a whole bunch of notes. So these poor guys, and if they're watching, Elders Rocklitz and Clayton, you guys truly are awesome. But they walk into my house and we sit down at the table and, I pull out my iPad with my notes and I'm like, I think it means this. And is this? And they're like, who is this crazy guy that's already read through this stuff? Because I wanted to, make sure I understood it. And there were things that I got right and things I didn't have the full context. So they were able to kind of fill in some of the pieces for me of stuff that having only read First and Second Nephi, obviously there's the context, the rest of the book that I didn't know yet. So they were able to kind of point me into certain directions. That was my first introduction to the church and meeting with the missionaries.
That's a pretty awesome introduction there, because it's true. Like, I remember being a missionary, getting a lot of those requests of like people want to meet with you, but very rarely is it someone who has been reading the Book of Mormon, has genuine questions. Right. A lot of times it felt more like, oh, someone just wants to yell at us and bash us or try and save us. Like, well, that's really cool though. So as you kept studying with them and reading the Book of Mormon, what sort of impressions did it make on you?
reading both the Book of Mormon and then also reading a lot of previous talks from different, from either the First Presidency and, a General Conference, and reading through those talks, I was able to kind of, through the elders' help, they would say, hey, you've got this question, go read this talk. And it would give me bits and pieces of things that in different ways of looking at things. Because the biggest, I had a handful of just core problems with the concept of religion. The typical ones like, why would God allow X, Y, and Z bad thing to happen? The common thing. Everybody has that. I'm nobody special. Everybody has that same thought. But those were the things that kept coming up. So through them, they were able to help direct me towards different talks that could help explain things. And I started seeing where, while the church has a very specific, dogma and a very specific canon of beliefs. Obviously there's the Old Testament, the New Testament, Book of Mormon, Pearl Great Price, D&C. They were able to give bits and pieces of information to me, but it still wasn't always clicking. And it wasn't until I spoke with Elder Moon, who was another missionary that came in during one of their, transfers. And I still had that same issue. I was like, yeah, but why would God allow this? All the horrible things I saw as a paramedic, how could a loving God allow that? And I remember him explaining to me, obviously we'd already gone over the plan of salvation. So I knew the basic concept. I still have the pamphlets. I had the little pamphlets. And yeah, I still have them here. So I knew the concept. But specifically, he was saying, well, okay, that in the pre-existence, we basically chose to come here. That was the concept, that we had the opportunity to come here or follow the adversary. And he said that no matter how evil or bad someone's actions are on earth, they started off the right way. So they started off by making the right decision to come here. They made horrible decisions while they were on earth, but that's why God could still allow them to have some sort of peace in the afterlife and not everybody going to, the outer darkness, because they made the choice to come here. I was like, okay, that kind of helps. But then what about all the innocent people that are, you've got somebody that's a drunk driver that crashes into a mom and her kids and kills everybody. That's something I've seen, something I will never forget. Why didn't God just reach in and say, oh, no, you can't have that last beer, or no, you can't drive this direction? And it took the elders re-explaining to me, the core principle of why we're here is our agency. And if God reached in and stopped that one person's actions, no matter how bad the repercussions are, he broke his own rule of allowing us all the ability to make a choice. And I was like, okay, that only kind of makes it a little better. You still have the horrible outcome of those children. And then the last thing that they said was, our life here is just a teeny blip. So when you think of all of eternity, yeah, there was that horrible event that happened in that absolute little teeny blip. But for the next 100 years, 1,000 years, million years, billion years, all of eternity, they're going to be in paradise. And they had served their purpose on this earth. For whatever reason, when they were born, they were chosen that they didn't need to necessarily learn, or their only act needed to be that. They accomplished what they needed to, and they were able to go on to paradise. Some of us, others like me, are a little more stubborn, and it takes us longer to kind of learn our lessons.
Feel you on that one.
So some, they get their lesson like this, and others, you got to be hit in the back of the head with a 2x4 a few times to kind of catch on.
It's so true. I love the way you put that, because I just have a couple thoughts, if that's okay.
Sure.
First off, when it comes to kind of like building our testimonies and understanding that, it's not always something that immediately clicks, right? I feel like for me personally, understanding those complex concepts, it's something that you learn line upon line and precept upon precept, right? And that's what it sounds like what it was for you, right? Like it came over time. It's something that you kind of ponder with and grappled with. And I love that you shared that, because we don't have to be discouraged when our questions aren't immediately answered,
Right.
but when we take a little bit of time to work for them, right?
Exactly.
And two, just that experience, the plan of salvation is the ultimate context for our lives. Because it's true, right? Like, without the plan of salvation and understanding what comes after and our purpose here, yeah, it makes no sense why a loving God would allow these
We'll allow
horrible,
all that to
horrible
happen.
things.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yep.
I mean, there's no way you could call a God benevolent and allow him and let those things take place at all. But with that
Exactly.
context, everything changes. So I love that you shared that.
Yeah. And that was, it took the elders, kind of helping me with that. It was a maybe 2-3 month period, and, of meeting with them and kind of just starting to get enough of the information that I could get a little glimpse of what was going on. I still don't know everything, obviously, but that gave me just enough glimpse that I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to join this church and I'm going to get baptized. But of course, I didn't tell the elders that. They kind of had to still work for it. But I kind of made up my mind within the first month of meeting them. And then I think it was probably about 2.5 months of us meeting before I actually said, yes, let's do it.
I mean, was there any specific experience that kind of, like a moment where you were just like, this is something I need to do? Or was it more of a gradual process?
I would say it's a gradual process. And then there was one thing that I wanted to do first, which I'll explain in a minute. And then after I explain that, there is the one last thing that convinced me.
Okay.
So I'll give that as the little tease.
You've got me hooked. You've got me hooked.
Okay, so there's one last thing that truly convinced me. So the one thing that I wanted to do before I joined the church is I wanted to meet the people. I hadn't been to church yet at all there. I'd only been meeting the missionaries. So I wanted to introduce myself. And I was like, hey, can I do that? And they're like, well, we have this thing called, fast and testimony. I had no idea what that meant. And they're like, you can go up there and you can, kind of just give a little speech and say who you are. I was like, okay. So I wrote like a 15-minute speech and I gave it to them and they're like, no, dude, there is no way that the bishop's going to let you stand up there for 15 minutes. But they gave it to the bishop and he read through it and he realized that what I was saying was important. It was important to me, not necessarily to others, but it was important to me to say. So he's like, if you can cut it down to about 10 minutes, we'll let you do it, which is still really long, but it ended up being like 13 minutes, but they didn't complain. So this is the very first time. Like, I didn't want to go to church at all until I did this. So my very first day there, I walk in, I meet the elders at the door. They guide me in, sit down with me and chit chat a little bit. The bishop walks up to me, knows me by name, which was totally strange. So I was like, how does he? Now, as a member of the ward council, I understand how they know because I talk about all this stuff in the ward council. But then I had no idea. And I went up and I did my testimony and I stood there and I still remember I'm standing there and there's, 100, 150 people all staring at me. Part didn't bother me. But I start off saying, hi, I'm an atheist. And then I tell basically the story that I just shared with you. And as soon as I say I'm an atheist, everyone's eyes lock on me, then they lock up on the bishop, and they look at me, then they look at the bishop. I was expecting pitchforks and tar and feather and get this heathen out of here. But no, everybody was really receptive of it. And I gave my little 13-minute speech. So like I said, it was basically the same story I shared with you. And when I got done, what surprised me is everybody came up and they would say, oh, this one part of your story resonated with me. And here's how. And they would say how bits and pieces of my story meant something to them. One of the gentlemen that came up to me was a recovering alcoholic. And he said that, that really meant something to him, that, my story, that I was just kind of writing the person off as an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. But he said that was a battle that he had to overcome. And he appreciated me just being open and honest about it. So that was my introduction to the church itself. And After that, I told the elders, I said, all right, we're going to do this. I'm going to get baptized. And they're like, all right, sweet. So we go over I think it's this one. I don't remember which pamphlet. It's one of these pamphlets has the questions in it.
Mhm.
And we go over all the questions to get me ready for the interview, and perfect. And I remember like vividly, like I could play this over like a movie in my mind. So we're at the kitchen table. We say our goodbyes. I give them an extra bottle of water to take with them. They go out the front door. I wave to them goodbye, and I close the door. And then I hear a voice. And it's an audible voice. It is a dark, just in the most disturbing thing you could ever possibly hear. The worst horror movie voice, just dark, and I can feel it. And the best way to describe, in cartoons, you have like a little angel on one side and like a little devil on the other. I didn't see that, but that's kind of the best way I could visualize it and explain it. And this voice told me, you are a fool. They have conned you. And I was like, whoa. Okay. And it wasn't, like a loving God trying to tell me, hey, you're picking the wrong religion. This is blah, blah, blah. No, this was obviously evil, was mad that I was making that decision. And it took a little bit of time for me to realize kind of what was the message behind this. And after thinking about it for a couple hours and just kind of praying about it, I realized that through my entire life, unbeknownst to me, I was following the adversary, because anytime you are not following the Father's plan, what is the adversary's goal? To destroy people and separate them from the Lord, from the Heavenly Father. So by default, I was following the adversary without even realizing it. And at that moment, he knew that by me becoming baptized, while it wouldn't magically make me perfect or anything, it was putting me on the right path. And he didn't want to lose me. And I'm nobody special. I'm sure he does that to millions and millions of people. But at that moment, as strange as it sounds, the adversary was the one that gave me the final conviction that I was doing the right thing by joining the church and following the Lord. Because I was like 95%. I told him I was going to do it, but there was always that, 5 or 10% chance that I wasn't. At that moment, I knew it. 100%, 110%, 150%. There was nothing that changed my mind at that moment.
I love that you share that story and sharing that conviction, because that's something that as a missionary that I saw happen a lot, is that as soon as someone was ready to take that step and made that decision, that's when the adversary was attacking at his hardest.
Yes.
And I love that you were able to recognize that too and call it out for what it was.
Yeah, it wasn't a very smart tactic, because that's not a tactic that would work on me. And he hasn't stopped. There's constant temptation. And I would say, and this is not a good advertisement for the church, but people need to understand the full context. After joining the church, my life has not been, butterflies and rainbows and perfection. It actually got worse. Lots of my life, I ran a very successful business that I lost. I lost a ton of money. I lost a lot of things. And every single time it was more just another, burden placed upon me, and another burden placed upon me, and another burden placed upon me. And each time I would look at it and it's like, this is just more reasons and more things that the adversary is trying to put on me to try and convince me I was going down the wrong path. Because, oh, look, life got worse. How could it be better? And it took a good year and a half for those things to turn around. And it was just, you just got to keep fighting through that battle. And, some people say that they join the church and life's perfect. It's not. Anytime that you're on this earth, it's not going to be perfect. I don't care who you are. Even for the prophet, his life is not perfect. His is probably a little bit better than mine, but, it's not perfect. But the adversary just continues to tempt you and continues to taunt you. More than temptation, it's taunting.
Well, actually, with that, I really appreciate you saying that, because I love the authenticity and reality of that, right? Like, no need to sugarcoat things. So, and as you said that, a quote came to my mind of President Nelson, where he just says that the gospel of Jesus Christ makes life easier, but it doesn't make life easy. How do you feel like that quote has kind of reflected itself since you joined the church?
I hadn't heard that, but I like that quote. So how I would take that is, it's not easy by any means. It's easier in knowing, there's been times where I've been literally on my hands and knees, just trying to figure out why I'm in a certain circumstance. And the vision, I don't want to say a vision, but like the thought that comes to my mind each time is, I chose to be here. I know what the plan of salvation is. So obviously I don't know what took place prior to, us being here. And a lot of that is information has not been shared with us. But at least the way I picture it is, I probably had a glimpse of my life ahead of me. And I chose to follow that plan and to go here. So if I already knew all of the problems that I was going to go through and everything that could possibly happen, and I chose to be here, means I know where I'm going. Because honestly, if I knew I was going, to a worse place, I would have just picked that to begin with. Why suffer if you're still going to go to, a not so pleasant location? So as silly as that may be, it gives me that little glimpse of, of hope that I know. I'm like, all right, I knew this was going to be tough. And the specific challenges that I face are different than the challenges that you face, because these are the challenges that I needed to go through to become a better person. The challenges that you have, they are specific to you and your life, because those are the lessons you needed to learn. And that's kind of how I would look at that quote.
So Drake, knowing that you're kind of coming from an atheist, agnostic background, I'm really curious to hear about how you built a foundation of faith, just because so many different converts to the church have an established faith, whether it's a Christian background or Muslim or whatever it may be, but you came from nothing. Sorry, does that? Oh,
No,
that's not.
That actually, it makes perfect sense, because from my religious views, I did come from nothing. I had, as far as I was concerned, we were just an accident of biology, and science could explain everything. And there was no need for God, because if you understand science, you don't need God. So how did I build that foundation? Prior to even being introduced to LDS, I think I was already starting to open up my eyes and my mind a little bit. It wasn't conscious or even, purposeful. But as I started studying more and more science, I was having more questions about the science. I was like, well, that doesn't, once you actually understand it, like, well, okay, that doesn't completely explain. So you go back to like even just the Big Bang Theory, and you start saying, well, there had to have been something prior to then. Well, what was the something prior to then? And it was just little small things that science, I started to discover, didn't have every single answer. I still believe in science. And the way I look at it now is, science is just the language that God used to create everything. As we're discovering, as humanity, as we're discovering science, we're just learning the ways in which he did things. The stuff that's in this beautiful book here, and, I've got another one here. Hold on. The stuff that's in these beautiful books here, while true and accurate, they're also simplistic. They were not designed, from my opinion, to explain everything. You start off with Genesis 1, in the beginning. Well, why is the entire creation of the universe just a handful of small verses? Because at the time, God knew we couldn't understand the vastness of everything. So he gave us just little small pieces of what we needed to know. Because truly, what is most important that we know from Genesis? There was nothing. God created it. We're here. We love him. That's really the summary. The pieces of how it was done was never the purpose of Genesis. And I viewed, prior to coming to the church, from a perspective of ignorance, that I expected, well, Genesis said it had to be done exactly this way, and this is how it's done. And I didn't understand the nuance that That's the truthful but simplistic view. Just like how you speak to a small child. When you're telling them and explaining things to them, you're not lying. You're just giving them small little nuggets of information that they can understand. And as I grew up and as I studied more science, I started realizing that, not everything was there. Science didn't explain everything. And it didn't need to be this binary, either the books are, the books are real or science is real. It didn't need to be a binary. It can be together. We can have both of them working symbiotic. So over the years, I started being more open to that, but not consciously. So I think to answer your original question, when I started being exposed to religion from a more almost scientific perspective of me researching it and trying to understand it, it started to fill in the bits and pieces. And the core belief, or I don't want to say the core belief, but one of the core beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that really resonated with me was the concept of modern day revelation, because that explained everything to me. That no, God didn't need to tell us everything on day one because he knew he was going to keep teaching us over the years. So as we were capable, as we studied science and as humanity progressed, we were capable of understanding more and more information. So he's like, oh, okay, here you go. Here's a little more. And he'll keep giving us these little nuggets of information as we're capable of understanding it. And no other religion, at least that I saw, had that concept. Mainstream Christianity says if it's not in this book, it's not true. And I'm being simplistic, but that's kind of the view. And I liked the concept that if God was speaking to us here thousands of years ago, why would he stop speaking to us? Wouldn't he continue to speak to us? So these were things that even as an atheist at the time, it made logical sense.
I love that answer, actually. And Drake, I love your perspective that you have on that, because I come from a background where a belief in God was very prevalent, but I appreciate you sharing that and your experience in building that. I think that's fantastic. So Drake, as you've continued to kind of learn and grow and be a part of the church, what are you kind of working on now? Are there any sort of like projects or anything that you really focus on at the moment?
One of the things that I had been working on was a book that I wrote, and it's a fictional book. It was the first time I had written a fiction book. And I wanted to take some of my ideas and concepts of religion from a perspective that I was trying to figure things out still. So as I'm researching things and I'm trying to figure stuff out, I was taking those notes and I'm like, hey, this would make a good fictional story. So I wrote a book called Whispers of the Architect's Labyrinth. It is book one of a trilogy. And I finished the first book, and I'm currently working on the second. And the, say, 30-second summary of the book, we start off with meeting our lead character, Stephen Abner. And the world is just chaotic around him. There's political assassinations, there's wars, there's famine. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. And he knows that he has to do something about it. He's leading a group of people that's fighting to protect his country and protect his people. He was tasked with a mission that he needed to document everything that was taking place as basically a last story to give to humanity to explain everything that has taken place. In chapter one, we realize that all this stuff is going on around him, and he's up against, a ticking time bomb, basically. He knows he's going to die the next morning. There's nothing he can do about it. Nothing is going to change that, but he has to finish what he was writing. The end of chapter one, he completes it. He disseminates it, sends it to the world, and his captors come and take him captive. We then go in chapter two, we follow the story that he wrote, where he explains the origins of where did our universe come from? Was Heavenly Father a man or someone prior to his existence as being our God? And it's strictly fictional, but just trying to explain some things that we just don't know yet. And then it brings it down to modern day, where We go through the Holocaust. We go through some of the most horrible things that humanity has done. This is definitely not a children's story that you read to your kids at nighttime, but it's not something that glorifies evil either. It touches on it in such a way that it brings these things to light so people can think about them. And my goal is, while it is fictional in that the characters are fictional, a lot of the storyline, I believe, is very close to what's really going on in our modern times. So all the corruption and things that are going on that I think are the adversary trying to destroy humanity, I start putting these things together so that I hope the reader is able to start connecting the dots in real life. And I hope at the very end that they think about it and they realize what's really going on and that there's so much more to what's going on in the world than us just as an individual person.
Well, Drake, I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your experience with us. That's so powerful. I'm sure we're going to have audience members who would love to reach out to you, who would love to kind of learn more about your current projects or about your story. Is there a good place where they could reach out to you?
Sure, they can go to drakekimball.com. I can give you the link. You can link it down below if you like. Yeah, that'd be a great place to go. They can check out my books, check out my social media, which I'm not very active on. I'm not good at that, but hey, we'll give that a shot.
Well, that's perfect. Well, yeah, we'll link that in the description down below. And we just appreciate your time and appreciate you so much for coming on the show today.
Wonderful. I appreciate you having me.
Well, and thank you guys too for tuning in today. Really appreciate you guys. And if you want to hear more from us or see more of our videos, be sure to check out this one or look at the playlist that we have linked in the description down below. But that's all we have for you today. We'll see you guys next time.